Pythagoras was an ancient Greek mathematician who discovered a theorem that tells us about the relationship between the lengths of sides in right angled triangles. So it's important to know that this theorem and this topic only applies to right angled triangles. Before we think about the formula and how to apply it, we're going to focus on the right angled triangle and look at labelling the sides. So really simply, we're going to call the sides A, B, and C. So we have A here, B over here, and then C. A and B are interchangeable, so A and B could be swapped round and it wouldn't change how we apply the formula. But C always has to be the side that is opposite the right angle. So you might find it helpful to draw a line from your right angle straight across to the side opposite, and that is C. We have a special name for this side C, and it's called the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is the side in a right angle triangle that is opposite the right angle, and it's important because that's always the longest side. So it doesn't matter what the other two sides are, A and B, side C will always be longer than them. Pythagoras' theorem involves the relationship between the lengths of these three sides, but very specifically, what we have to do with each side is square it. So the formula, and you might have seen this before either lower down the school, or you might have just seen it being spoken about. This is probably one of the most famous mathematical theorems or formulas that you're going to be asked to use. And it's c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So to talk about that in a sentence, what that means is if you square the lengths, of the two shorter sides and add them together, you get the longest side squared. We're going to look at a couple of examples now on how we can actually apply that theorem to find the length of a missing side. So for this example here, we have a right angle triangle. Again, that's the most important thing here, that the triangle is a right angle triangle. And we're being asked to use Pythagoras' theorem to calculate the length of x centimetres. So we have two shorter sides here, 6 centimetres and 8 centimetres. And we're being asked to find this third side, x, which is our hypotenuse. So your first step in all of these questions is going to be to copy down your formula. And you get given the formula in the Nat5 apps formula sheet. So c squared equals a squared plus b squared. We know that this is C because that's the one opposite our right angle. And A and B, I'm just going to label in any order because, again, if you're squaring and adding them, it actually doesn't matter what one's A and what one's B. 6 squared plus 8 squared is the same as 8 squared plus 6 squared. So now we're going to replace the letters in the formula with the things that we know that are specific to our question. So instead of c squared, I'm going to write x squared, just because that's what's in the question. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can just keep it as c squared. And then a squared is 6 squared, and b squared is 8 squared. So in your calculator, you're just going to type this entire row in one go. So please make sure that you are either using a scientific calculator or you've downloaded the Scientific Calculator app. If you haven't done that yet, please let me know and I can direct you to the proper app, because using the little calculator that comes built into your smartphone just will not work for this. You'll make so many mistakes and it takes way longer than if you're using a scientific one. So please make sure you're using the proper calculator. And if you don't have one yet, then let me know and I'll direct you to one. When you do that, it comes out to be 100. So we've got x squared equals 100, and usually in maths, once we get a number as our answer, we can stop. Just one final number. But this is x squared. And if we look at this triangle, even though it's not drawn perfectly to scale, it doesn't really make sense for this to be 6 and this to be 8 and that to be 100. It doesn't make sense. So what we have to do is basically undo the x squared And to undo that, you've got to take the square root of 100. Some of you can probably do this without a calculator, which is great, but if not, just put it into your calculator and it will give you the answer. What you can also do is if your previous answer was 100, you can just type into the calculator square root of and then use the little answer button, and that will automatically sub in 100 because that was your most recent answer in the calculator. Let's just get rid of that. So when you work out the square root of 100, you get 10. And remember that it's 10 centimetres. You always have to have units on your answers for these types of questions. Okay, so make sure that when you're doing these questions and the exercises and in your jotter, that you are following all of these lines of working. So copy down the formula, substitute your numbers in, find a value for c squared or x squared, show that you're taking the square root of it, and then show your answer with units. Sometimes though, when you're doing Pythagoras questions, you won't always get nice whole numbers as your answer. Sometimes you will, and questions like that are based on triangles that we call Pythagorean triples. So they are right angle triangles where all three sides are perfect whole numbers. But there's only a certain amount of them and they don't come up all the time. So what we need to be aware of is that sometimes you'll have to round your answer. So this question here asks us to round to 2 decimal places. Sometimes the question will specify either a number of decimal places or significant figures, but if it doesn't and you get a long decimal answer, just pick 1 or 2 decimal places. Try not to round it to something like 3 or 4 decimal places because that's really long, and also don't round it to the nearest whole number because that's not quite accurate enough. So just make sure that you read the question carefully. Decide whether it's asking you to round it to a certain number of decimal places or significant figures, and if not, use some common sense and round the answer yourself at the end. So first of all, just like with the last question, we're going to label the sides with A, B and C. So we're going to start by labelling the side that's opposite the right angle as C. Remember that's our longest side and our hypotenuse, and then label the other two sides with A and B. So we're going to copy down the formula, which doesn't change even though we're not dealing with whole numbers anymore, as our answer. We get c squared equals a squared plus b squared. C squared is y squared, just because y is the letter that represents the length of side we're trying to find, equals 11 squared plus 5 squared. Again, remember that a and b are interchangeable because think 5 squared plus 11 squared is the same as 11 squared plus 5 squared. It doesn't matter what one comes first because we're adding. So work out 11 squared plus 5 squared in your calculator. Your next line of working is just that answer. You don't have to put in a line of working where you say y squared equals 121 plus 25. That would be 11 squared and 5 squared worked out. You can just go straight from this line here to this line. But again, this gives us y squared. We're not really interested in y squared, we're just interested in y. So to find what that is, we have to take the square root of 146. Note down the side here that I've gone from writing this in terms of c squared and y squared, and now I'm just talking about y. So make sure that you don't put y squared all the way down the left hand side. Once you get to this line here, transition to just using y. So as I mentioned, this is going to give us quite a long, horrible answer. And if you're doing this on a scientific calculator and it just comes up as the square root of 146 as your answer, what you want to press is the button that says S and then an arrow and D. And basically what that does is it converts it from this form here, which is known as a surd form, hence the S, to a decimal, which is what we want. So press that button and it will turn it into a decimal for you. Again, if you don't know how to do that, please get in touch with me so that I can help you fix it. That becomes 12 points, and we have to show both the unrounded answer and the rounded answer. So that's really important in order to get your rounding mark, so if there's a mark in the marking scheme for rounding, you have to show that you've rounded a number. So you have to show the unrounded number and then your rounded final answer. So the way to do that is just to say, well, it's 12.083045, and then just put dot, dot, dot. You don't have to put loads of numbers here. Just put maybe 4 or 5, just so that you're showing that the number is actually longer, or it continues on past what you're going to round it to. And then round this. So for rounding to 2 decimal places, we go 1 number after the point, 2 numbers after the point. And based on the third number, we're going to stay at 12.08 instead of rounding up to 12.09. So 12.08, our units are millimetres, and that is your final answer.